Hey, Taro, inside the LAProductions.us studio, unplugged and totally uncut with rock and roll legendary drummer Corky Laing.
Hello, Errol.
Good morning, Corky. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing pretty good. I've had 14 cups of coffee and I'm ready to roll.
You're ready for a radio show then, man. That's how we gas up.
That's... I guess so. I mean, the old days will be $70 a cup, but not now. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, but you and I both came up in the days of radio, though, radio and music, where you had to go through the percolator when it came to the coffee. You had to sit there and wait for that stuff to mix down.
Yeah, that's true. Oh, you're right. Just sit downstairs and go to Starbucks and you got it. We managed to slip in early before the lines down there at Starbucks. Wow. I tell you what. It's good. Yes. So to answer your question, feeling pretty good, pretty all right.
I love it. Well, you have every reason to, because, this book is really going to touch people in a way that most autobiographies don't, because you have added the human side to what your journey has been.
Well, thank you. That's very kind words. And yeah, that's very nice. I don't know how to respond, but except to say thank you.
Well, I wish I could have been a fly on the wall when you discovered that your mother had saved all those letters, because, all musicians go through those moments where they have their biggest fan, and it's usually their mom or their dad.
Right. When you watch all the show, the football games and stuff, and the guy scores a touchdown, he runs back to the bench, the camera's on him, and he says, "Mom, we're number one." It's always the mom. It's never dad. So I always thought to myself, yeah, the moms are pretty big in the world of people and kids. So, but you're right. It was a surprising, what word should I use? It was surprising. My co-writer, Tuja Takala, and I were working on a musical project a few years back, actually 6 years back, and we were rehearsing. She discovered the box of letters, because before that we were talking about memoirs, and at that point, all the musicians were writing something. They had a lot of time off, I guess, but they were writing memoirs. They were writing certain things, and Tuja wanted to give it a bit of a twist. We just didn't know how to do that until she discovered this box of letters that my mother had saved. And I knew nothing about it. I remember writing the letters, but she saved, how many letters were there? 250 letters over 35 years. So, and I got to tell you, Errol, these letters got out there. I was very lonely, and it's almost like, I had a romantic affair with my mother. When you see it in the book, it's kind of funny. But when you're on the road, it's scary out there, and I was only 15 when I started hitting the road and playing these tertiary markets in Quebec and Ontario, and it could be pretty funky out there in the middle of a Canadian winter. So that inspired me just to keep in touch with my family. I came from a very, very large family. I have triplet brothers, a sister, my grandmother, and my uncle, and we all lived in this house, and I was the baby in the family. So you can understand when I wanted to tether myself to the family, because I felt lost, out there. So that's sort of the idea that Tuja came up with. Let's use the letters as a time clock over the 30-odd years, and then embellished with stories about those particular events from local bands in Montreal. Then I hooked up with Leslie and Felix in Mountain, and then Jack Bruce. So the flow was there, but the loneliness did not disappear. Bigger crowds, but there's no crowds in your hotel room when you get back at 2 a.m. I'm not going to cry.
The way that you share that story is, I've been on this year-long adventure of trying to figure out, is creativity an addiction? And you're talking about this loneliness. So in a way, it did infect you, didn't it?
Absolutely. It's infect you is kind of a strong word, but it does. It takes you over, because it has to do with traveling. Well, especially with Mountain and Westwood, traveling hours and hours a day to play for an hour. So everything's about that hour, and then you come crashing down after a performance. And I think I was addicted to performing. I really loved it. Of course, I'm a drummer, and it's all physical. So when you play, it's almost as good as sex. But, my kind of sex is probably better.
The name of the book that we're talking about is Letters to Sarah. This is going to be a Broadway play, some sort of a rock opera. It is written all over it, Corky.
Really? All right. Did we think about it that way, Tuj? I'm sitting here with Tuja Takala, but she's very shy. She's Finnish. So she just came over from Helsinki to talk to everybody, but very quietly. So I appreciate that. So who do we call? Errol, who do we call to make that movie?
But you understand the emotional connection to it, because I when I was just sitting there reading it, I was thinking I could see one person on one side of the stage reading one letter, and then a second letter being read, but then the songs are being played in the middle of the stage. There's such an emotional connection to this book.
That's wonderful. Keep on talking, Errol. I'm loving it. No, what I'm saying is, it's like when you write a song. A book, needs to say, is a bit longer, and I don't consider myself a book writer, a novelist. But with Tuja, we came up, it was a collaborative effort, and, we didn't agree on everything. I wanted to have a really decadent, kind of snorting ants off the street with Ozzy Osbourne or something like real, some real dark stuff. And she said, absolutely not. And she said, let's keep this with a little bit of class. And I said, you realize drumming, class, rock and roll class, I don't know, they're on different ends, but I had to go along with her. I got to tell you, Errol, it's my life, and I do exactly what she says.
I grew up in the state of Montana, so Canadian music was very big in my life, and there was always a difference between the sound of what was coming from up north of us. What was it that when you joined up with everybody in New York and things, did you have to go through an evolutional change as well, because Canadian music is different?
That's a perfect analogy. It is different, and the people are different. In Canada, the Queen gave all the residents and the people that that settled in Canada, the Queen of England gave them the land. They didn't have to fight for it. In America, if you were trying to settle, you had to literally fight for your territory. That sort of what's the word? That sort of goes down as the difference between Canadians and Americans. And then you have the music business. And everybody in Canada over the years says, if you're going to make it, you got to go to the States. My father gave me one piece of advice, the only time he ever talked to me. He said, Laurie, if you want to find out if you're really good, go to a place where the people know that. They know what good is. And that's when I did everything I could to cross the border to get to New York City. And it gave me confidence. Just crossing the border was a big deal. You couldn't just cross the border and play in the States. You had to get the American Federation of Musicians cleared. It was a lot of work. But at the time, I had the energy along with the guys in my band at the time. And we did. We went to the Peppermint Lounge to play. I think we were 15 years old. We didn't even have our license to play. We BS'd ourselves through it. But Johnny Maestro and the Crest were the headliners. And there we were, like 4 Canadian Montreal kids dressed up as Robin Hood. That was our outfits. And we didn't realize at the time it was a gay club. So as a result, we were challenged, and we went through it. And I'm just saying it's a big change from Montreal, Canada to New York City. And if you can handle it, keeping in mind that is the late 60s, so New York it needed a bit of work, and it was great. I think it was the greatest time of my life, but boy, was that out there. But that's what I was talking about, if I'm rambling, about the Canadian-American thing. Everybody from Neil Young, Joni Mitchell, they were up there in the farmlands. They knew they had to get out of town, how to get out of Canada. And anyway, so yeah, it's different. It's a lot more organic in Canada. They love their folk, they love their country music, and every now and then some heavy rocker will step right up. And I don't know what they did back out in Vancouver, but Canada's huge, So let's put it this way: from Montreal to New York was a lot. The proximity of that was much easier than going to Vancouver. That's going halfway around the world. So musically, keeping in mind that at that time for me, that was the British invasion, the mid-'60s, and we were in Montreal, and the band that I had was opening up all the big shows for The Who, for Cream, for the Kinks, Hermits. There's a place called the Montreal Forum, and that's where all the big shows, Dick Clark would come up with a half a dozen bands and play, and our manager happened to be the fellow that ran the Montreal Forum, so they had to put Canadian acts on those shows, keeping in mind the Invasion, these musicians, whether it was Eric Clapton, they weren't heroes yet. This was their first tour. I remember we opened up for the Rolling Stones. Brian Jones was still alive. And, it was, yeah, you got me thinking. And it was quite something. So we were very fortunate to open up these shows and to meet these guys. Jimi Hendrix, after the show, driving back to his hotel. All these sort of things you sort of don't make too much out of now. Because, again, these guys weren't rock heroes. This was their first tour. They were more frightened than I was, in terms of being in America. Because when you go, the British thought that Canada was part of America. Yeah. But that's our problem, But, no, it was a great time. I'm rambling on. Just let me go. How much time do I have? Do I have a few days here? Because I'm ready to go here.
Well, what's so fascinating is that your stories match your book. And that's the reason why I created this iHeartRadio channel, is that so that people can hear the physical voice and the vocal tones of those that put pen to paper to write.
Well, it's great. I mean, it's great to have this time with you, Errol. And just, you just shoot with questions. If no, shoot with the answers, and I'll ask the questions. How's that?
Well, here's the one thing that I've always believed, and more people will argue with me on this. I always thought that you guys should be honored because you were part of the New York music scene. The Ramones, it's all New York. Well, what about you? I even though you're from Canada, I still believe in my soul that you are part of that major scene that took place in New York City.
Oh, that's funny. Errol, can I tell you a quick one? When they were doing the New York Long Island Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and they were indicting Paul Simon, Billy Joel, it was really this was about 5-6 years ago. It was a great sort of event. And they called for Leslie and myself to come and pick up our awards. So Leslie gets called out, and they hand Leslie West. I hope they hand him the award, and thank you very much. And then they call my name out, and they say Corky Laing. And Leslie looks at me, and then I walk out on stage. They called my name, and they handed me the beautiful porcelain, whatever's award for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And Leslie comes to the mic and says, "You don't understand. He's from Montreal. He's from the Long Island. He's gonna. This award's gonna be on eBay, And I'm looking, and you know what happens? A year later, they call me up. I was inducted that year, and they deducted me.
Oh no!
They took me off. They took me off the list because I'm not a Long Islander. I'm not a New Yorker. But you know something? I felt the whole time more New York than I ever felt in Montreal. I mean, when you're in New York, you're overwhelmed, and you become what it is. And I couldn't get the New York out of me. As a matter of fact, when I went back to Montreal, they didn't recognize me. Because I had long hair. My hair. This is before the long hair. But it was funny. I got deducted, yeah. And it was funny because that became more newsworthy than being inducted, Did you hear about Corky? Yeah, he was deducted. Well, how do you deduct an award? Anyways, I still have the award. Don't say anything. I didn't give it back. It's a true story. That's a true story. Yeah, this is rock and roll for you.
I was just going to say that this is a true rock and roll story. And now in our hands, we have the book, which is titled Letters to Sarah. And you're so bravely honest in it. When you were putting this down, were you also releasing from your caverns of memories? Because you know how the creative mind is, Corky. We hold on to stuff until we can't do it anymore, and then we have to let it go.
Yeah, that's a great question. I have to say, I didn't anticipate the feelings. It was over. Tuya and I worked on it back and forth because I would go to Finland for some other shows, and she would manage me on the tours in America and Canada. So we spent a lot of time over years going back and forth and doing stories and this, reading the letters, figure out what letters to put in. And yeah, I all of a sudden it conjured up a great deal of memories. Most of them, I must say, were great. Like I keep on telling you, I was very lucky. But there were some moments there, that came out of nowhere, some very dark moments. I think they're in the book, and I think they're expressed in probably a less dramatic way, but maybe even more dramatic. But everybody goes through this. You have a lot of musicians listening to your show. I don't care how old or whatever. When you commit yourself and your inventory, which is in your heart, to going on the road, and that's where it's at. You have to get out. I don't go with this internet stuff at all. And yes, I know it's important, but I got to tell you, there's nothing better than just getting out, whether it's around the block or it's out of the city or out of the country. As a musician, it's your job. It's your job to commit yourself to performing for people so that that your music gets out there, and only then will you discover how good your music is. And again, I was very lucky. I played with some great players, and in those days when they were alive, amazing people. And these guys all had the same attitude. Can't wait to get out there. You know, the English bands loved touring America. They loved it. But the only trouble is they can only tour for like 2 or 3 weeks at a time. Then they had to go home and sit around for months, doing nothing. And here's the thing, when you have that anti-time, that's what I called it. Time is when it works. Anti-time is when you're waiting. And the anti-time could be killers, could be a killer. I don't have to tell you how many people, how many brothers and sisters, we've lost to the anti-time. I mean, the music will live on. But the point is it's really an exercise. It's a commitment. And I don't regret 1 second of anything, but there's times when you think, what the hell am I doing here? Why am I not selling shoes? And I thought about it for a while, Arrow, and I thought, if I sold shoes, it would all be the same color and the same shoe. So I don't know. Anyway, so what I'm getting at is, what was I getting? What was there a question there?
Well, we were talking about so many questions within the question, but you keep talking about going out on the tour and being on the road and stuff like that. But you also told me about 5 minutes ago how lonely it is out there. How are you staying so strong during those moments of darkness? Because the average person would say, I am going to go sell those red shoes, and that's all I'm going to sell.
Yeah. Wow. You actually listened to the red shoe story. Okay, that's great. What goes with it, Aaron, it just goes along. It goes along with the life, whether you're a lawyer, a doctor, whatever it is, there's going to be downtime. It's just that you got to do it for a reason, and you got to believe that it's going to come back even better. So those days, well, hey, I wrote letters, whether it's 2:00 in the morning, and I had to, have myself a little bit of Johnny stick, and I just couldn't get to sleep. And I'm sure everybody goes through that. In this case, that's where the letters came up, and I never thought that we would do a book. I mean, never came to my mind. I just thought it was my way of satisfying. It was sort of my drug, was to keep in touch with my mother and my family. It was very important to me, and I personally look at this book as a family book. It's kind of being tethered to what's real, and your family, no matter good, bad, dysfunctional, they're real because they're your blood. And I thought to myself, wow, if I could just keep in touch with my mom, I'll be all right. And the couple of times I didn't keep in touch with her, I wasn't all right. And, it's in the book, but the point is that it's worth it. That's what I can say. Every minute was worth it.
I've been a daily writer for 25 years, so I can go back into my books and I can sit there and look at that handwriting from 18, 20 years ago. What was it like for you to be reintroduced to your handwriting? It had to have been an emotional rescue as well as an emotional down.
Oh, well, I'm going to tell you this. My mother made her living writing thank you notes for all her friends' weddings. They didn't know how to write, and my mother had exquisite handwriting. Amazing. She had beautiful, and she taught me how to write really beautifully. And I forgot over the years, for some reason, whether my hands are beat up. I'm embarrassed to say that I'm very embarrassed about my writing. Even now, God knows, it's wonderful to sign a book. And I look at my handwriting, I said, what? It looks like I'm in my daycare center. It's a boom, boom, boom. Anyways, so I'm sorry to say that fell through the cracks because my mother taught me everything. And I look at my original writings. I have stuff that was saved from elementary school. I was cool. I got like an A in handwriting, and now I'm lucky if I got a Z, because I can't, I don't know, my nerves, whatever it is. But God bless you if your handwriting's still there. Great.
No, it's not. It's not. No, I mean, it's gotten to the point. No, so I just tell people that I'm just going to become a doctor, because, I mean, you can't understand what they're writing either.
That's good. Yeah, yeah. Can you imagine that? You go all the way through med school, getting through now everybody uses the computer, so you don't have to write, so, and, I'm sorry about my handwriting, I have to say, but Tuya's got great handwriting, and she writes it out, and she also does the computer. So it works, and across the board, the dots are connecting, so to speak, and every now and then there'll be a dot that will fall out. Are you following me on this, Aaron? I'm getting very, very out there right now. I think there's something in my coffee.
One of the greatest things about drummers and bands is that, to me, they are the communicators. And I love the relationships that drummers have with other bands. Did you ever cross paths with Carmine Appice? Because the two of you have such a great personality and a love for life.
Yes. I have crossed paths with Carmine, and he trips me every time. I love Carmine. And Carmine, again, I'll be glad to say it, was a hero. I remember seeing him along with a million other people on Ed Sullivan's show, and I saw him with those big bass drums. And he couldn't have played any slower, because he's playing You Keep Me Hanging On. And I told my mother, you see that drummer? He's going to get a parking ticket. He's playing so slow. Anyways, at the time, Kachis, by the way. Anyways, I've met Carmine over years and years, and again, the Long Island thing. And I had this talk with Carmine, because he said, Cork, you just got to Long Island, but, you got to get into the whole vibe. I said, well, I've noticed, Carmine, your last name's Appice, and then there's Sanji Gennaro, who plays with Joan Jett. Then there's Dino Vanelli, who plays with the Rascals. And there's Bobby Rondinelli. And he said, yes, what's the problem? I said, I think I should change my name to Corky Linguini. I think I have to get into the Italian vibe. And he said, Corky, you'll never be in the Italian vibe. You're going to be out there as a Canadian. Face it, you are Canadian, you are on Icehead, and we love you. But don't try to join in with the Italians. So that was it. It's a true story, by the way. But I love Carmine. But Carmine is, he has got I'm lucky. I've got 50 years. I think he has like 100. I think he goes back to pre-Civil War. He's got stories that go back. He met all these guys. He played with them, Led Zeppelin and all that. And I just told him, I said, one day I'm going to shave the fur on your collar. That's what I told him. He walks around with fur on his collar.
With all the people that you have been blessed to perform with, what was it like to go in to do your very first solo album? Because all of a sudden, the left and the right side of your stage was different.
Yeah. I've always loved writing. I mean, I tell the story of seeing when we opened up for The Who, and there's Keith Moon, and I'm looking at him, and this man is passionately in love with his life, how he's playing up there. I wanted to be him. I wasn't just inspired by Keith Moon. Watching him play and seeing the joy and the passion, and he was like choreography sitting down, his hands, his legs. It was beautiful. And the thing is, it was a tremendous inspiration for me. And then on the other hand, that particular year, Bob Dylan came out with Nashville Skyline. And at the time, I was doing a lot of writing with my local band. I wrote Yasker's Farm during that time with George Gardos, my bass player. And at the time, we also I wrote Mississippi Queen, the words. And in other words, I was really into writing. So I was a bit conflicted. I had Keith Moon, drums, and then I had Bob Dylan, lyric, writing. So I've always loved to write. So when I had the opportunity, after West Bruce, and it was after that, yeah, I had the opportunity to go on my own. I was scared, excuse my Shakespeare, I was scared shitless. And as it turned out, I got this amazing record deal through John Eastman, and Ron Delstner and a few people helped me out. There was some great support. I got a deal with Electra Asylum Records, which was a West Coast company, but it was also the coolest record company at the time. So I was scared to death. And they sent me down to Georgia to work at Capricorn Studios, because if you're following me, Electra Asylum was with Warner Brothers, and Warner Brothers bought Capricorn Records and Studios. So there I was down in Macon, Georgia, making this record. And Macon, Georgia is a very tough town.
Yes.
You know, when you sit in the studio and they have the cameras outside?
Yeah.
You know, and so I'm sitting there while we're mixing, just watching the screen, and I say to the engineer, what's his name? Anyways, John Sandlin, the producer from the Allman Brothers. I say, John, look at that TV show. You know, it's pretty wild. It looks pretty real. And John said, that's going on outside. They're shooting each other outside the studio. Guys with guns, you know. And I'm going, well, we're going to be in the studio for a couple of years. We're not going out there. It was a tough area. It was tough making Georgia. But and making that album, I had tremendous support from everybody down there. And I was the first Northern musician to go and play and record at Capricorn. Wow. So people like, all the guys from Charlie Daniels Band and from the Allman Brothers, they all came there. I was invited. They had picnics in Southerner for about 10 minutes, and it was great. It was really a great experience. But again, I should have possibly found a singer. And at the time, I was working with Mick Jones, who went on to do Foreigner.
Yes, yes.
And Mick heard my material. He says, Cork, man, it's very, very cool stuff. He says, you should get a singer. You should get a singer because you're singing a bit flat. And I said, okay. And I did. I went around looking for singers. And John Sandler, the producer, said, well, I got personality. We'll just go with you. And I said, okay, we can try that. Anyways, Mick Jones went on and spent a year and a half looking for a singer for Foreigner. And he nailed it. Right? He got Lou, and I'm thinking to myself, well, sometimes you got to give it in. I really liked recording, and I had Otis Redding's brass section. I mean, the people and the players. Eric Clapton came down to play on a session, and I'm going, wow, how can I go wrong with this record? Because I didn't get a singer. And I did learn. No, I did. I went for vocal lessons and all that stuff to get better as time went on, and. But I regret not getting a singer, and that's the only thing. But the songs I'm very proud of. I'm very proud of the writing, and it gave me a lot of those songs on my solo record. Leslie said, no way we're doing that stuff. It's too pretty. Can't be pretty.
Well, congratulations on this book. I want to talk to you more in the future, mister. You have got a wealth of knowledge.
Well, thank you. I thank you for your support on this book. By the way, it's very different to be out there, usually I'm flogging a record, and a song, but this is very different. It's paper, it's got words, and it's a book, and I'm very proud, and I'm very, very thrilled that you're supporting it. Thank you so much, Harold.
Absolutely. Please come back to the show anytime in the future. The door's always going to be open for you, Corky.
I will, I promise. All the very best.
You bet. You be brilliant today, okay, sir?
Oh, thank you. Yes, thank you. Do I get a check?
Yeah.
I'm kidding. It's so sick. There's no money. Aaron, there's no money in the music business anymore. It's just fun. That's what the currency is now.